What's up, guys? My name is Zack, and for the last 7 days, I've been driving the 2024 Ford Ranger Lariat. Up front is a 2.3-liter turbocharged inline-4, and down below is a 10-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be making this video because I've spent the last 7 days driving this Ranger, and although I wasn't particularly excited when I saw this on my schedule, I actually ended up falling in love with it, and so I'm excited to share all of those reasons with you today. But if you would like your vehicle reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form, takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. But let's get back to that 2.3-liter turbo under the hood. Well, that is a carryover from the previous generation of Ford Ranger. Nothing really new there. And if you are into engine lineages, you can actually trace this engine all the way back to the Ford and Mazda days of the early 2000s, where they used this engine in the Mazda Speed 3. Now, of course, it has been changed, adapted, and modified since the early 2000s, but if you trace its roots all the way back, you end at Mazda. Besides the head gasket issues that these engines had in the early 2010s, they've actually seemed to be pretty reliable since then. They use a similar version in the EcoBoost Mustang, and it seems to work out there pretty well. Like I said, paired to it is an automatic transmission. Unfortunately, we do not get any Rangers with manual transmissions here in the States. The only manual pickup truck in this class that I know of is the Toyota Tacoma, so if you want to shift gears, you gotta go over there. Last but not least, the Ranger is 4-wheel drive. However, you can select a Ranger with 2-wheel drive if you go more towards the base model or manually select it. How does it feel to drive the Ford Ranger? Well, that's been one of the biggest selling points for me. I've really enjoyed the ride quality. But I did take it on a 6-hour drive the other day, and it really handled itself well. Better than its competition for sure. You're not going to get away from the fact that it is a decently heavy-sprung truck. It's still going to drive like a truck. It's not driving like an Altima, which would be a whole different thing. But of the trucks that I've tested, and I've tested everything in this segment, this rides the nicest, and that was really nice to see. Visibility is pretty good, however, it does have cameras to sort of fill in the gaps, and steering isn't too heavy, not too light. Throttle response is okay, unless you put it into sport mode, but I wouldn't recommend driving around in sport mode every day. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have a completely digital gauge cluster. I really like the style that Ford has been doing with their digital gauge clusters. I think they're easy to read, and they are aesthetically pleasing, which checks both boxes that I require. As you switch through the drive modes, you will see some color and options and graphics change, which is very neat on its own. And so overall, I'm very, very happy with this gauge cluster. It's been great for the last 7 days. On the steering wheel, on the left, we have our adaptive cruise control and lane centering system, as well as our volume and voice commands. And off to the right, we do have our selectors for that gauge cluster screen, as well as the skip track. Off to the left, we have a climate control vent, headlight, fog light, and gauge dimmer switches. And moving out of the door, we have our memory seats. We get 3 different settings for memory seats, power mirrors, and power windows found down below. Moving into the center, we do get a speaker up on the dash, but then we get our vertical screen. And when I first got this truck, I was a little skeptical of the vertical screen. I didn't really think that I would like it. However, over the last week, I've actually grown to like it a lot. I think Ford handled it really, really well. Because when you're in your settings mode, you do want a vertical screen to show as many settings as possible. That's really nice, and it's really organic because all of our phones are set up in a similar way. However, when it comes to Apple CarPlay, which is a more traditionally horizontal application, it actually only takes up the upper portion of the screen and then allows for staple items down below to remain always on the screen, like the climate controls and heated seat options. So no matter what screen you're in, you still get access to those vital settings, which is fantastic, and not all companies do. Ford themselves could take a note from this with their Ford Mustang. We do have different camera views we could take a look at here in the center screen, which is, I think, wonderful. It does have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And one of my favorite settings is that it also has ambient lighting, which I think really, really makes the truck look cool at night. Now, you can't change the color of the ambient lighting, unfortunately, here in the Lariat, but I like that it has it at all. Down below that, we get our physical buttons for for the climate controls. Absolutely love that they also include physical climate controls if you don't want to use the screen. Again, Ford could learn from themselves with the Ford Mustang that only has digital climate controls. This has physical. I assume if you're out on the job site, you're dirty, you're muddy, whatever. Touchscreens don't work well in those applications, so they've included that. We also get a physical volume knob, which is great. And down below that, we have our USB-A and USB-C, as well as a wireless charger and the shifter. Not a huge fan of the shifter. I think it feels very unnatural, and you have to hit the button at the front of the shifter instead of at the side. Normally when a shifter is like low and wide like this, you hit the side button, but that's for manually shifting gears. So it just hasn't been a very good experience with the shifter. To the right of that, however, we do have cup holders, so we'll do a big friggin' bottle test. However, again, it also fails the big friggin' bottle test. Then we get our power parking brake and a couple of buttons for our automatic start stop on and off, our parking assist, traction control off, and the rear locking differential. And off to the right, we have our selector for those drive modes that we mentioned earlier, as well as our 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low drive settings. Center console doesn't have anything interesting in it besides 12-volt outlet and this little shelf. And then we have the seats. The seats are very comfortable. Very, very comfortable. They feel like an early 2000s seat. And I mean that in the absolute best way possible. They're sort of moldable. They're cushiony. And I hate modern leather seats. They're so taut and businessy, and they're made to look good, but they're not very comfortable in all honesty. Well, these are actually very comfortable, and I've really, really enjoyed sitting in them. That was one of my biggest drawing points to this truck as well. It's just how comfortable it is, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. They are also heated, which is very nice, and power and memory, as you saw on the door. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats, so let's go do a backseat review. All right, we're in the back of the 2024 Ford Ranger, and honestly, I can't say that I love it. It's also not terrible. I do get a wall outlet as well as USB-C and USB-A down below. I get a center console, please. There we go. With cup holders back here, and this window can be opened with a switch up front, a power switch, which is very nice to see. Spatially, if I'm remembering correctly, I think the Colorado had a little bit more rear seat space, but honestly, when you get into trucks like this, the Tacoma, Frontier, Colorado, it's so marginal, the different spaces. So it works. You're gonna be splitting hairs cross-shopping these trucks. That's just the way it is. So anyway, let's hop out. We'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, better known as the bed, and then we'll talk about the looks. When it comes to the bed of the Ford Ranger, nothing really too crazy. We do get a soft opening tailgate, which is really nice, and we do get tie downs at either end, but we also have outlets here, a 12-volt outlet and a standard wall outlet. But overall, nothing really too crazy to see. As you can see, I have my strap in the back because my girlfriend's actually kayaking right now. So we use this to haul the kayak, which it was great for. And this does have the optional spray and bed liner from Ford, but that's pretty much it. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and this is the facelifted, updated Ranger, and I love it. I really, really do. A lot of people say that it looks now like a Maverick, which makes sense. It does look kind of like a bigger Maverick, especially with the headlights, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think the Maverick is actually a pretty handsome vehicle, so I think it's a win-win for Ford overall. This does also have the chrome package for the chrome wheels and chrome side steps. I think if I were to personally spec my own Ford Ranger, I'd probably get rid of the chrome wheels, get rid of the chrome side steps, and the badging at the back of the tailgate. I think it makes it look really, really early 2000s. And although I love the early 2000s feeling seats, I don't love the early 2000s looks. So that's just my own personal taste, but of course you will have your own. With all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think, having driven the Ford Ranger for the last over 500 miles and 7 days? Well, I've really enjoyed myself, but let's get the downsides out of the way. The lane centering system is not very good in the Ranger, and I say that confidently because I also had an F350 this year, and it was a lot better. I think it comes down to the weight of the steering wheel, because the lane centering system will yell at you if you don't keep your hands on the wheel, which is good. That is a good safety measure. However, the only way I can tell if your hands are on the wheel is if you physically turn the wheel at some point. So I took this on a 6-hour road trip the other day, through Illinois and Indiana, which is just long, straight roads, and it kept yelling at me to put my hands on the wheel. Even though my hands were on the wheel, I just wasn't turning the wheel or giving it any input because it was straight through cornfields. So that was pretty annoying, and it kept canceling and yelling at me and said, please put your hands back on the wheel. So I found myself just wiggling it at like 70 miles an hour, which isn't a great feeling. I don't really worry about these trucks too much when it comes to reliability, although I would be lying if I said that it's not somewhat on my mind. Just the 4-cylinder turbo. The 2.3 I know has had its issues in the past, but I think it's worked out now, and in terms of its competition, I would definitely put this higher up there, considering that the Colorado and GMC Canyon have new engines. So this has been around for nearly 2 decades with very little problems as of recent. Let's talk about the upsides, and really it's just one big upside, which has been the ride comfort and the usability of the truck. Driving it on those long straight stretches were very comfortable. I might as well have been in the King Ranch F350, but I wasn't. I was smaller. And something else I really like is that this feels like a normal size pickup truck. Pickup trucks have gotten so large over the last several years that I feel more comfortable driving this than I do an F-150, let alone the F-350. Funny enough, I was actually able to review 2 vintage pickup trucks while I had this truck, so I could actually do some size comparisons. So here it is next to a 1985 Ford F-250, as well as here it is next to a 1989 Dodge Ram. So in case you wanted a sense of scale and you're waking up out of a 30-year coma, here's how the Ranger stacks up to some of the older counterparts. I really truly have been blown away because this truck is such a good daily driver and a truck. So finally, at the end of truck day, having sampled the Tacoma, the Frontier, the Colorado, the Canyon, and the Gladiator, I have to say that this might be my favorite. It's a toss-up between this and the Toyota Tacoma, but what the Ranger does better is the interior. The interior of the Ranger Lariat feels a lot nicer than the TRD off-road Tacoma that I had. Here is the Ranger that I'm sitting in now. Bada bing, bada boom. Here is the Tacoma. You can kind of make your own assumptions, but Toyotas have never really had that nice of interiors, so the Ford takes the cake on that one. I would say maybe the Toyota might have better reliability, or I just would trust Toyota for their engine reliability a little bit more. But honestly, like I said, I don't have that many worries about the 2.3. So overall, when it comes to the smaller trucks, I think the Ford Ranger might be one of my favorite picks and favorite trucks that I've had, which is interesting. I never consider myself a Ford guy, and yet my top 3 favorite trucks I've driven this year have all been Fords. And the Ford Raptor R is probably going to be my vehicle of the year for 2024. So the blue oval is definitely doing something right. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Ford for loaning me this vehicle for the last 7 days, as well as G. Schmidt for cleaning and delivering the vehicle, and of course, the Midwestern Automotive Media Association. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.